Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about the BBB standards for charity accountability and how meeting them can benefit your organization. Today's speaker will be me, Mara McGinnis. I am the Charity Accountability Program Manager at the Education and Research Foundation of the BBB of Metro New York. Thank you again for joining today. As I will be the only one speaking today, I can't really field questions in real time. So if you leave me a question in the box, I would be happy to answer your question at the end of this broadcast. If it is a question that might be a little bit more involved, I'll be sure to email you after the fact. And I'm just really looking forward to getting to chat with you today about our program and about how we can work together. So let's get into it. The BBB helps to find and recommend businesses and charities that they can trust. Our vision is an ethical marketplace where buyers and sellers can trust each other, and that's setting standards for marketplace trust on the business end. The foundation specifically works with nonprofit organizations, so that's what we're going to be talking about mostly today. So the Metro New York BBB Foundation mission is to be a leader in advancing marketplace trust by upholding and recognizing ethical business and charity standards and practices in New York. So that includes, for today's presentation, I'm speaking to both Metro New York and upstate New York. So I will be talking to New York State as a whole, which is very exciting. So if you're joining us from upstate New York, welcome to our standards briefing. So the way that we are a leader in advancing marketplace trust and upholding these ethical businesses, primarily today, we're going to be talking about charity accountability reports. We also do educational programs for charities and business leaders, as well as consumers. And our aim for these programs is to enhance performance and impact, to meet our high standards, and to detect and prevent frauds. So if you're on this list to receive information about this standards briefing, it would be our hope that you're also on the list to receive information about those programs and hopefully join us for those as well. So in the BBB charity reporting system, there's about 64 programs in the BBB system that report on about 11,000 international, national, and regional charities, including the National BBB Whites Giving Alliance. But today we're going to be talking about the Metro New York BBB Foundation, as well as talking about upstate New York BBBs. So these are going to be organizations that we're working with that have more of a local reach. So these are organizations that are in the 5 boroughs, Long Island, Mid-Hudson, and my department. And when we work with our upstate New York, that includes everything outside of that. So the reach within those missions, it really is a local reach. So why do we do what we do? In the 1920s, the BBB system began doing charity reports, and this really came out of a desire for the public to have information about nonprofit organizations outside of the government. We are an independent 501c3, and that is our mission, is to make sure that donors and charities have a place where they can go to find these standards that are set and to verify that an organization is BBB accredited. In 2001, we really came into our own as what we are today, and working with the BBB Wise Giving Alliance to work with these standards in specific. So our BBB standards for charity accountability, these were developed by a national panel of experts. So these are based on research about donor information needs. So some people, it is a misconception that some people think that our standards were set directly by the staff at the BBB. We actually took in many people into consideration when we did make these standards. So we talked with people in fundraising and accounting and different areas of nonprofit work that's so important. And we came up with these 20 standards that cover key practices, which are governance and oversight, finances, measuring effectiveness, and fundraising and informational materials. Outside of the standards, we do have 3 recommended practices, which are diversity and pluralism, adherence to the law, and prioritizing open and ethical behavior when you are working in your organization. So some guiding concepts for BBB standards. First and foremost, this is a voluntary disclosure. We are working with organizations that have developed a report with us completely on a voluntary basis. So if your organization is looking to commit to meeting these standards, it's completely on your own volition, and creating that report is something that just gives another added layer of transparency, and again, prioritizing that open and ethical behavior by developing a report with the BBB. So we look for accuracy in reporting and solicitations. It's kind of the bread and butter of the BBB is when you get a solicitation, is this truthful and is this accurate in nature? And of course, duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, active oversight of financials is extremely critical, and that actually does tie in with the standards. And of course, focusing on achieving your nonprofit mission is always top of mind in a nonprofit. So when we evaluate key practices, we are not rating an organization. So you might be familiar with the BBB business end, where a business is rated an A business all the way down to an F business, and you can be anywhere in that spectrum. When we are evaluating an organization, we're evaluating the key practices, which is standards-based. So you will either meet all of our standards, which would mean that you are automatically BBB accredited, or you may miss a few standards. But at no point do we determine that your organization is an A, an A charity. It's 4 stars. That's not the way that that's not our guiding concept for BBB accreditation. In terms of the financials that we use, we typically look for the GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles. So if you're an organization that makes over a certain amount of money, over a certain amount of threshold, that we would be looking at your audit when we are looking at your financials. So this would be preferred over something like the IRS Form 990, but if you are within a threshold of a CPA review, we would also look at that. As nonprofits, we understand that accountability is more than financials, which is why we hope that our standards are more holistic and all-inclusive of that, that principle. So what is the benefit to donors? As a donor, you will have the ability to have a free and quick way to check if charities meet high standards. So by going to our website, which is ny.bbb.org, or by going to bbb.org, give.org, if you look up a nonprofit, you're able to get a quick report that indicates really, again, those key practices in a nonprofit to see if a charity is meeting those standards. If you are an organization that opts into the SEAL program, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that is a widely recognized valued charity trust mark, where a donor can quickly indicate that you are an accredited charity, that you have met those standards, and that they can typically on your website click on that link, click on that seal, and it brings you right to the BBB charity report, which again goes all into your organization and how you do meet those standards. BBB charity reports, what is the benefit for charities? So the way that our BBB standards benefit a charity just really depends on the type of organization that you are and what you're looking for. We have heard from organizations that our standards are helpful key practices. And one way that that operates is because, again, our standards do cover different areas of a nonprofit, anywhere between fundraising, communications to your accounting team. This allows collaboration for different departments to speak to each other at least once every 2 years, which is how long a BBB charity report is active for. So working to kind of get that foundation from our standards, we hope is going to be beneficial for your organization in terms of your communication between departments. On the other end, BBB accreditation, that shows a consumer or a donor that you meet all 20 standards. This BBB accreditation does not come at a fee. Developing a report is completely free of charge. If you are a BBB accredited charity, that means that when a donor goes to our website, or maybe they look it up in Google and they Google your organization BBB, our website comes up and it shows that you meet our 20 standards and that you are a BBB accredited charity. That is completely free of charge. If you would want to opt into the BBB SEAL program, that's a program that's only eligible if you are an accredited charity. So if you do opt into this, you would be able to have the fundraising tool for BBB accredited charities only. And that's that BBB seal that you might see, similar to the one in the corner. It's not exactly that, but that is similar to what our BBB seal looks like. You would be able to put that on point of solicitations, so on your donate button, or near your donate button on your website, on the bottom of your web page, as well as different paper fundraising solicitations. So if you're not familiar with what a BBB charity report looks like, I've actually included a sample or a template of what this would look like if you were to meet this, if you were to meet all 20 standards. So as you can see, there are green check marks next to all of the boxes, which indicate that you have met this standard. You would then include a little bit about your organization, the mission, your programs, your governance and staff, fundraising methods used, confirming that you are a 501c3 nonprofit, as well as some financial information that, again, is taken directly from either your audit, your CPA review, and in very, very rare and small instances, maybe your IRS Form 990. So this is what that would look like if you were to pursue a BBB charity report and you did meet all 20 standards. So some BBB charity accountability general areas of focus. We are primarily focused on organizations that are publicly soliciting donations, which does include government grants, which is separate from contracts. So our primary focus is if you're reaching out to the public, you're asking them for funds, you're soliciting them for donations or contributions. That is our key area of focus because, again, we're looking for transparency in those communications and verifying what your organization is saying that they're doing, confirming that it's actually being done. So that is our key area of focus when we are looking to evaluate an organization. Eligible organizations requesting BBB charity reports, we do focus on larger organizations that do collect a greater share of dollars in contributions, organizations that are in business for 3+ years, but we also may evaluate smaller organizations. The reason why we look at those thresholds is because we want charities to really develop their own foundation before coming to us. When I say foundation, I mean kind of laying the groundwork of what your organization is doing in terms of internally, in terms of policy, in terms of fundraising practices, really getting your feet on the ground before coming to do a BBB charity report. Because what we want to do and our aim is always to work in collaboration with your organization, to tell your organization's story in a very truthful way. So before you come for a charity accountability report, and maybe you are considering doing one now, my first recommendation is always to watch a webinar or to look over the standards. So if that's the situation you're in, I'm very glad that you joined us today, and I hope that these standards will help you lay that groundwork. So before I jump into the standards, standards 1 through 5, that pertain to governance, just a piece of housekeeping. Again, I will be sending these slides after the fact. So if you're going to be furiously typing notes or writing them down on paper, please hold off on doing that. I will be happy to send you the PDF of this webinar after it concludes. So if you have any questions, again, I will be taking them at the end, and I look forward to answering them. So standard 1 has to do with board of directors in providing that adequate oversight of charity operations. So this is really how your board and your staff are speaking to one another. So some examples of why a board and the staff would be speaking to each other: primarily financial information, right? Is your board looking at your budget, your audit, your Form 990? Is your board overseeing financials, and do you have someone designated at your organization to oversee those financials? For example, this could be a treasurer, this could be a head of an audit committee. This is someone who is independent of the staff to just verify and look over your financials. So outside of financial information, making sure that your board is also monitoring a conflict of interest policy, reviewing written fundraising contracts, and regularly performing the CEO performance. So when we are talking about board of director oversight, it is really important that you are always looking to New York State law in terms of whistleblower policies, related party transactions. We get into that a bit with our standards, but in terms of adhering to the law, it is always my recommendation that you seek NYS law before coming to this and coming to the standards. So always making sure that you are staying up to date on the most current laws. And one that did change in our standard 1, we updated this in 2019. Our standard 1 now includes that a board oversight element requiring that the organization complies with applicable government charity regulations. So not only is it a recommendation, we are looking in the standard to ensure that your organization is complying with government charity regulations. So if you're not already, always be sure to be on the lookout for any changing charity trends in the New York State law. And again, we do wish to call your attention to the updated disclosure requirements for solicitation of charitable contributions. This was a change that was made. There was an executive law published by the Attorney General in August 2019. So if you're not familiar with that, I really recommend looking into that after this webinar. Standard 2 is a little bit more straightforward. We look for a board of directors with a minimum of 5 voting members. And the reason why that is we look for there to be that different people's perspective and to allow for that conversation to happen between at least 5 voting members. New York State law, I believe, is 3. We ask for 5. So standard 3 was actually the most missed standard of 2020. And I do want to spend a little bit more time on this one because of COVID-19 and the implications that that makes on board meetings. So we ask at the BBB for a minimum of 3 evenly spaced full board meetings per year with a majority in attendance, 3 with highest attendance if there are more board meetings. This is where I really want to emphasize this. Face-to-face for at least 2 meetings, 1 phone conference call allowed out of those 3 board meetings. So I haven't really seen anyone face-to-face, let alone anything that has to do with a board meeting or a work meeting since March 2020. So we would never expect that your organization would be meeting face-to-face at this point. So with the implementation of this standard, we would allow for video conferencing to meet this standard. So if your organization is using Zoom, Skype, Google Hangouts, anything similar to that, but it's important that your cameras are on. And I know that that can be difficult sometimes in COVID to keep your cameras on, but the reason why we ask for the cameras to be on is because we believe that it's really critical that we can see and hear each other when we are having conversations that are about strategic planning, that are about important things, again, like making observations about financials, voting, all of those things. Hopefully your board members are seeing and hearing one another. So we would ask for in 1 fiscal year, 3 board meetings. For right now, 2 on Skype or on Zoom face-to-face, and then the other one can be an audio conference call. I hope I explained that well, and if you have any questions about how your board might not have Zoom capabilities right now, I would just ask that you reach out to me directly and independently, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. Standard 4, this has to do with related contributions between board members. So not more than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, directly or indirectly compensated persons may serve as voting members of the board. Most organizations that we work with meet this standard because most board members understand that it is financially independent to have any gain from the organization when they're on the board. So in this, you can have at least 1 or 10%, no more than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, compensated on the board, but again, really closely monitoring why that person would be compensated. Some people even ask, why would anyone ever be compensated? And the reason, it would vary by organization, but let's say that you have a lawyer on your board and maybe you pay a relatively small stipend. That would actually be considered compensation. So 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, just keeping that in check. Compensated persons, however, should never be the board chair or the treasurer. So a chair must not be the someone performing the role of CEO or COO, whether or not they are compensated. So the 1 or 10%, that rule does not apply to a board chair or treasurer. Those are 2 rules we think should be completely financially independent. In addition to that, a board chair may not also perform the role of the treasurer. So again, keeping those things very separate is important. Compensated or uncompensated senior executives. So let's say that your organization is completely volunteer run and no one has a salary. Even if that's the case, whoever is the senior executive, so a CEO title, that could be an executive director, that could just be a director, they may not also serve as the chair of the same organizations. So if they are someone who supervise, pay their unpaid staffs, if they perform functions that would usually be attributable to the CEO or COO, They cannot serve as the chair. It should be two separate people. And wrapping up standards 1 through 5, which have to do with governance. Standard 5, this is when we're looking at related party transactions. So we want to make sure that no transactions in which any board or staff member have material conflicting interests with the charity resulting from any relationship or business affiliation. So it's a very complicated way of saying that if you're on the board, and let's say that you provide a good or a service from your business, if you're a business owner, making sure that you're pretty independent of any voting decision based on that good or service that you might be providing. Again, New York State law has some conflict of interest and related party transaction laws around this. I would definitely recommend seeking out that information if this does sound like something that maybe your organization does. So some factors to be considered when you are doing a related party transaction is just making sure that the interested party really steps out of the vote, considering different competitive bids to make sure that you're really seeking an independent opinion about this good or service being provided. Okay, so moving on from governance, we are moving towards standards 6 and 7, which is measuring effectiveness. This was tied for the second most missed standard of 2020. So I will spend a little bit extra time on this one as well. So measuring effectiveness, strategic planning, year ahead, these are all things that we're kind of looking at and talking about when we're talking about measuring your effectiveness. So as long as you have a board policy of assessing no less than every 2 years the organization's performance and effectiveness, and of determining future actions required to achieve its mission. So again, very wordy, but the really easy way to explain this is every 2 years, having a conversation saying, where were we? Where are we going now? How are we going to achieve this? If you have a policy that indicates that you're committed to this practice, you would meet this standard 6. So why are we asking for it? The reason why we're asking for it is because we want to see that an organization has clearly identifiable and measurable goals and objectives and a process to evaluate the success or impact of your program to fulfill the mission. So we don't judge the results of this assessment. We're not here to say what you're doing is right or wrong. That's absolutely not what we're doing here. What we're looking to make sure is that your organization is committed to looking at itself in a very honest and transparent way and say what's working and what's not, and how can we fix it or how can we improve it. So along with this component of just having that policy in place, this could also again be a strategic plan that's very common, that they're very similar, is that we would ask that you have a written report of this assessment. So if you have this assessment and you have the whole board on, and maybe you put together a PowerPoint and you outline everything that was said, you have really clear notes in your minutes about this assessment, this would be considered a written report. That means that the governing body reviews and approves a written report outlining the results of that assessment against mission goals. So again, strategic plan performance evaluations may qualify if they meet this criteria. So if you don't have a standard, if you don't know if you meet standard 6 or 7, and you're not sure if you really have something that qualifies as meeting your measuring effectiveness policy, this, what you're seeing here on the screen, these are 5 questions that you might ask yourself in order to complete a measuring effectiveness assessment. And again, very simplifying it, what are you doing in terms of your aim at your organization? How are you going to make it happen? What do you have to make it happen? What have you achieved, etc. So if you have any questions about starting a measuring effectiveness policy, we at the BBB Metro New York, we actually have a template of what this could look like if you're stumped, and I'm happy to provide that to you after this webinar. Okay, moving on from measuring effectiveness and moving on to financial standards. So again, I want to reiterate that we understand that accountability is more than financials, but standards 8, 9, and 10 are the only financial standards that set target spending ratios. And a little bit about the overhead myth, indicating to both the donors of America and the nonprofits of America is that being honest about your overhead costs is not inherently a bad thing. It's actually a good thing to be transparent about where your money is going, and what your donors can relatively expect their donation to reach. So we did put this together with GuideStar, Now Candid, and Charity Navigator to discuss what the overhead map looks like. So other factors that matter in terms of just outside of overhead costs are obviously transparency, governance, leadership, results. These are all things that charities and donors are looking for when making donations. So about 94% of organizations that are evaluated do meet these ratio standards. 6 or fewer do not meet them. So we hope that these spending ratios are reasonable if your organization's on the smaller side. If it's very large, we hope that these ratios are reasonable to achieve. So with all of that being said, and with context, here's standard 8. Program expenses 65% or more. So we look at your total expenses, we look at your total program expenses, and we want to make sure that that's at least 65%. If you're not sure exactly what the program expense might look like at your organization, definitely talk to your auditing team, talk to your accounting team, and discuss what the program expense might look like at your organization. It's not going to be the same at every organization. If you're an animal shelter, if you're a food pantry, if you are doing more policy, more admin, this is going to look different from many different organizations. So understand exactly what a program expense looks like when you are going through the auditing process or a CPA review. Standard 9, 35% or less of related contributions spent on fundraising. So when we're looking at your total fundraising expenses against your total related contributions, at most should be 35%. An easy way to say this, 35 cents to raise $1. We want to make sure that we're staying really reasonable with that 35 cents. And if it's going to be on the lower end, that would meet the standard as well. So a related contribution, public revenue, contributions, there's a lot of ways to say this, but really what we're looking at is we're looking at revenue earned through including but not limited to these different streams of revenue. So this would be donations from individuals, private corporate funders, donated goods, in-kind donations, special events revenue, bequests. These are all points of solicitation from the public, so we would call that the related contribution. So again, we're looking at the fundraising expenses against the related contributions and making sure that's less than 35%. So standard 10 is accumulation of funds. This was also tied for second most missed standard of 2020. So I do want to spend some time with this here. So when we're looking at your unrestricted net assets available for use, so that is without donor restriction, we're looking for these to not be over 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of the current year's budget. So we want to make sure that the money that you have in the bank available for use, again, completely unrestricted. This does not count for donor restricted funds. This is unrestricted or designated unrestricted. We want to make sure it's not over 3 times your last year's expenses. Some things that don't count in this is fixed assets, right? So your land, your building, that's not included in this. That's not unrestricted cash. That's a fixed asset. So that's outside of this. So the reason why we ask for this is we want donors to reasonably expect that their contribution will be spent on current programs. This has been confirmed in public survey research. And again, disclosure, transparency, I feel like I keep saying those things because it's very much what the BBB is all about. We want to make sure that donors are not misled about where their contribution is going. And on that note, if over the limit, your organization can meet the standard by complying with disclosure requirements in direct mail, marketing appeals, and websites. So let's say that your organization is in a special circumstance where it's required to, or it is just a practice that your organization has 3 times more than your past year's expenses in the bank. As long as you are being extremely transparent with your donors about maybe even why that is, on your website, on that points of solicitation, it's just another level of that transparency and just really being open about your expenses and about how much you do have acquired. So again, all about transparency for standard 10. Standard 11 is about availability, making available to all upon request complete annual financial statements prepared in accordance with GAAP principles. So the national standard is that if you have over $1 million in income per year, that warrants a full CPA audit. If you're between 250,000 and $1 million, there would be a CPA review, and under 250,000 internally prepared statement. There's a lot of fine print about what it would indicate to get this financial statement. So it would depend on the size of your organization. It would depend on a lot of factors. So I would really recommend going to New York State and seeing what the requirement is. It does change, not often, but it does. So making sure that you are filing the correct financial statements is part of Standard 11. Standard 12, we are looking in your financial statements a breakdown of expenses according to program, fundraising, and administration costs. So fundraising could be development, administration could be management in general. I'm going to be saying program, fundraising, administration costs a lot moving forward, and the reason why that is we want to make sure that it looks similar to this. On your screen, you'll see that there are multiple programs at this organization. So breaking those down functionally, as well as the natural classifications of where or how that is what's being attributed to what program, to what fundraising costs, to what admin costs. So this could be salary, travel, postage, rent, all of those small things that make up one big organization, all of those things being allocated correctly on your financial statements. Some people think that fundraising costs could be de minimis. You know, it's on the smaller side. We don't do a lot of fundraising. I would always err on the side of being very transparent about your fundraising expenses. I'll get into that a little bit later, but if you are an organization who thinks, you know, we don't do a whole lot of fundraising, again, always erring on the side of transparency is the best way to meet the 20 standards. So why is it important that we ask for this functional expense breakdown? Is it we believe that it's a critical management tool for staff and board, but we also think it tells your story to funders and stakeholders, right? How is my donation going to be used? Where can I reasonably expect my funds are going to be allocated and attributed? GAAP requires that health and wellness organizations break this down. Your IRS Form 990 includes it. They ask you to break this down. So, you know, we do think it is reasonable to ask our organizations who do submit with us to break these functional expenses down. Now, Standard 13 has to do with accurately reporting these organizations, including joint allocations. So when we're looking at a audit or a CPA review and they're claiming that there are zero fundraising expenses, we want to make sure that we're really getting down to why that might be. The true amount that a charity spends on fundraising, there are small moments that we spend on fundraising that we might not even know. If there's a $25 Facebook ad campaign, that could be considered fundraising if you talk to your accountant in your audit, but that could be an example of something that you might not even realize is fundraising, but very much is. So making sure that you're on the same page with your development team, your audit team about what is being spent on fundraising is really key in meeting this standard. And to wrap up the financial statement, or the financial statements, the financial standards is going to be the budget. So this is a completely internally prepared document that must be board approved and must contain, again, the projected program, fundraising, and admin broken down just like in Standard 12. So the reason why we ask that a budget is broken down just like an audit is because we want to make sure that if you're going to be doing it for the audit, why not start the year like that? Why not enter the year looking at your program, fundraising, and admin expenses and knowing reasonably where your anticipated expenses are going to be allocated? So when it's time to get down to that audit, you're not really surprised by where your funds were directed. So getting into the habit of that, again, we think is a really great tool for staff and board. So an example of a budget that does not meet BBB standards would be the budget that's on your screen. This shows the natural classifications that we just spoke about. So your rent, training, insurance, These are all things where I, at the BBB, evaluating your organization, I can't verify where this is going functionally. So even something like this now on your screen, this is something that would meet our standard. I, at the BBB, can reasonably see that your program services, you can see the projected expense there, fundraising and admin. You can see that some organizations don't break down fundraising and admin, they just kind of put the supporting services. We would ask that those two are broken down when submitting your budget. So when we're looking at a budget, again, the totals are totally fine. That meets the BBB standard 14. If you do not have a budget, this is a tool where you can use to create a budget if you've never done this before and are interested in starting to do that at this point. Okay, that wraps up our financial standards, and now we are going to be working on our fundraising standards. So all of these have to do with fundraising and communications. We want to make sure that these 5 standards, these are the ones that really seek to ensure that your charity's representation to the public is accurate, complete, and transparent. So when I was talking all the way at the beginning about why we really started our organization and what our true mission and vision is, this really is the bread and butter of that. So standard 15 asks and requires that all solicitations, informational materials are accurate, truthful, and not misleading, both in whole or in part. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at solicitations to just be up to date, to be accurate, to disclose key facts relevant to the donation, financial and success statistics. So we advise it's better to avoid using overhead ratios and fundraising appeals because again of that overhead myth. And if used, we do check for accuracy. So making sure that every time you file an audit, that overhead costs is going to change and shift just a little bit, probably. So just making sure that you're really checking in with your solicitations, that they are accurate and can be substantiated. So some red flags when we're looking at a fundraising solicitation is saying, 100% of your gift will go directly to this. If you're an animal shelter, will go to this cat, Ruby. If you have 0 fundraising costs, can you back up that you have 0 fundraising costs? Can you back up that cat Ruby is going to receive 100% of those donations? So that's what we're looking for when we're looking at red flags and just verifying with you. It's an active conversation. I do want to just talk about that for a minute. I'm not sure that I really did, and maybe I would have hit it at the end, but while we're here, when we're working on your evaluation, it is very much a collaborative effort between the BBB staff and between your organization. If we have any questions that require any clarification, we are going to talk to you as soon as we see it. We're going to shoot you an email, we'll give you a call if that's what you would prefer, and we're going to work together to hopefully meet this standard. It's very much a collaborative effort. So when we're working with your organizations, we're never going to make an assumption about what you have presented us. We're always going to seek clarification to ensure that we're on the same page. Before we publish a report, you're actually going to receive a draft of what we anticipate that's going to look like, where you can see what the report is going to look like, and you have the ability to say, actually our mission changed, can we update it? And now I think that you're using an audit from that's now a little bit, it's a little bit later. Can we use a more updated audit? And the answer will be yes. So it's very much a collaborative effort. We want to make sure that the report is really representative of your organization. And with that, speaking of telling a story, your annual report. So we're looking for each organization to have an annual report available for use on request. That includes your mission statement, past year's program results, roster of officers and members of the board, and some basic financial information. So your total income, your expenses, again, broken down, program admin and fundraising, as well as your ending net assets. So these are all components that we're looking for in an annual report. In COVID, I'm thinking that we're probably not sending out really glossy, expensive publications out by mail. It's pretty expensive. So we could even just have a PDF on your website that says this is our annual report. Maybe you e-blast it to your list, your mailing list. Maybe you send it directly to donors who ask. But we want to make sure that if a donor requests an annual report, that you have one document that's available to send to them. So for example, if you have all of these components on your website, let's say you have your audit on one page, your board on another page, your results buried in newsletters, we can't very easily create an annual report based on piecing those together. So as long as you have one PDF or it's on one web page, one tab directly, then we would consider that to be an annual report. If you have an online digital report, that is acceptable. It's completely acceptable as long as a hard copy is mailed to those who request it. So people who don't have internet access, if they do request it, you do have something available to send. I did want to mention here that your 990 can actually qualify as an annual report if your program service accomplishments are on your 990. So those are really explicit in what they detail about your organization. So for example, this program assisted 250 people. This program reached 17 students. Those are really specific accomplishments. So if that is on your 990, that actually is considered an annual report. We would always advise that you do create a PDF that's a little bit more donor friendly, because as we all are in nonprofits, we've all looked at a 990 and we've all been very overwhelmed by the information and we know what we're looking at. Whereas a donor who might not be familiar with the 990, that's not exactly donor friendly. It would meet our standard, but we would always recommend that you create a more donor friendly PDF of your annual report. So standard 17 is kind of along those lines for website disclosures. So we would ask that on your website, you include all the information from your annual report on your website. So a very easy way to achieve this is by not only having the annual report, by putting it on your website. Because if it's on your website, then it has all the information from your annual report. So we hope that you would create an annual report and you would just put it on your website where you can meet the standard that way. If you have a mailing address, so your PO box, if necessary, but we really are looking for a street address of your organization. It's just one layer of added transparency to really indicate to a donor or any web visitor that you have a physical location, a physical space, and including your most recent 990 with an appropriate labeled link on your website. One of the most common questions I get from donors, consumers, people who are just looking to the BBB for assistance is this charity legit? I hear that all the time. Can you verify that this organization exists? So by putting your 990, your street address, your annual report, hopefully that question doesn't even have to come to me. They can just verify right away that this organization has an EIN, they are a tax-exempt organization, and that they are a legit charity. So including these website disclosures is really for transparency. Similar, in your privacy policy, we only have 2 standards left. I appreciate that you have all stuck around, is addressing the privacy concerns of donors. So having a clear and accessible privacy policy link on any website that includes what information is being collected and how it will be used, how to contact the charity to review and correct information, how to not share personal information outside that organization, and what security measures are in place. So these are just our 4 pieces that we're looking for in your privacy policy. I just want to take a moment to just talk a little bit more about security measures that are in place. If you don't know what security measures are in place and that maybe isn't on your privacy policy, I would speak to your webmaster, anyone who has control of your website and who knows more about the IT side of it. Really ask what security measures are in place and give that layer of security to your donors who might be donating online. They might be giving away their email address or their street address online. Including your security measures is just going to add that layer of protection for them. And if you would like to opt out, if an organization or a donor would like to opt out of any communications from your organization, if they want to opt out of sharing personal information, make sure that you make that really easy for them. I know that most organizations use Constant Contact, MailChimp, different servers that have that unsubscribe button, making sure that that's really available, because again, a number one question I get from a consumer or a donor is, I want to be off of this mailing list and I just can't figure out how to get off of it. That might leave a bad taste in someone's mouth. So making that super easy to just have someone removed from your mailing list, that's just one easy thing that you can do to really amplify that privacy policy. So if you have any questions about data security, we do include some resources here from the FTC, from the BBB. We actually did 5 steps to cybersecurity. So if you have any questions about that, I would recommend these resources. Standard 19 is cause-related marketing. So if you are an organization that is working with a for-profit business and you are a nonprofit organization and you're kind of finding that mutual benefit, right? So if there's a consumer sale or transaction that benefits a charity, for example, if you are an organization and you partnered with Starbucks, which how lucky are you? 25 cents of every small coffee bought will benefit your organizations. There are some things that we are looking for in cause-related marketing to make sure that at the point of the transaction, a consumer is completely aware of what this cause marketing entails. So the actual or anticipated portion of purchase price to benefit the charity, the duration of the campaign, or any max or guaranteed minimum amount, or any other limitations surrounding this. So let's say that it's only for the month of November, the cap is $250,000 for the donation. That is really giving all of the information necessary in order to meet this. Per the New York Attorney General, there is many different factors when looking into a cause marketing promotion. So I would look into that too. I included the link here. But again, as much information as possible, even if it's fine print, that is going to be really helpful to the consumer, to the donor, to make a wise giving decision. And to end this, standard 20 is going to be complaints. So a charity must respond promptly to a complaint brought by a local BBB or the Wise Giving Alliance. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. But complaints really, just as long as it's a marketplace transaction, that's primarily what we're looking for. Let's say you had a promotion where if you give a certain amount of money, 30 bucks, you get a t-shirt. Let's say that the person didn't receive a t-shirt. That would be considered a marketplace transaction. I would reach out to and ask to help that consumer really meet that benefit that was they were under the impression that they would receive. So just making sure that you are being really active in fielding any complaints that are brought forward to you would be how you meet this standard. I do see the question, will we get the recording and slides? I will guarantee that you will get the slides as pretty much soon as this ends. I'm going to send it to the email that you registered. The recording, I'll need to vet that a little bit, but you can expect that to be up online at least in the next 1 to 2 weeks. So if you would like a recording, please definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can send that to you directly. So the top 10 missed BBB standards, I did touch on them a bit as we were going. Number 1 was board meetings. Number 2, tied for 2, was the effectiveness policy, the effectiveness reporting, and the unrestricted ending net assets. So those are what we're looking at when we're looking at those missed standards and how we can really start to bridge that gap to make sure that if you have any questions about something like a board meeting, effectiveness policy, that we're fielding that right away, so it's not even a concern as you go to submit your evaluation. If you have any questions and you would like on your own time to read more about the BBB standards for charity accountability, this is where you would go. It also includes an implementation guide to not only show you what the standard is, but how to implement it in your organization. So the disclosure process, during COVID, we're really working with our online evaluations. So sending mail is a little bit difficult right now. But if you reach out to me directly and you would like to begin a BBB charity report, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little profile for you in our system. I'm going to send you the information and you can just kind of poke around our portal and see tab by tab, what do I need to submit, right? So my measuring effectiveness policy, send the PDF, your audit, include the PDF, and then at the end, you'll approve this and submit it. Once it's approved, we'll get the green light, okay, ready to evaluate. We'll begin the evaluation process, and again, any clarification that we need, we reach out to you directly. Whoever filled out and approved the application, that is the person who will get the first touch by us. We're going to work that out with you. We're going to get to hopefully a point of resolution, a point where maybe you meet our 20 standards. You'll receive a draft report that indicates this is what it's going to look like when we publish it on our website. If you have any questions, comments, or edits, that's where you would do that. And then we would publish the report. So I just really want to emphasize that there is nothing that we would publish without confirmation and knowledge that this is what is going to be published. We're always in communication with our charities, and we really take pride in working with our organizations to make sure that we're working together in that way. So again, really, I said it like 1,000 times during this webinar, the New York State Attorney General Charities Bureau website, this is where you're going to get the regulatory information and guidance. Really seek it out if you have any questions about anything that I indicated that you might want to talk to the Charities Bureau about. It's best to give that a little visit. For FASB, so this has to do with accounting standards updates. This is something that maybe your accounting team or your auditing team might find of value. New York State nonprofit regulations and legal update news. Here are some links for that. And now if you meet all 20 standards, your organization, again, is automatically accredited. It automatically shows on our website those green check marks and says, you met. You are at that point eligible to become a BBB charity seal holder. The BBB seal can be used on your solicitations, on your website. There is a licensing fee and agreement that goes along with that. So only BBB accredited charities may join this optional program. For more information about the licensing fee, it is available on our website. If you have any direct questions about that, I'm happy to send you an email and chat about that a little bit further. But again, really want to emphasize that there is no cost for a BBB charity report development or BBB accreditation without the seal use. If you do opt for the seal, this is what might be what it looks like on the website of the organization and what it's going to link you to. And then you're going to see that little accredited charity seal right there. So thank you all so much for joining today. It was really a pleasure to talk with you all. If you would like to reach out to me directly, here is my email. If you are from upstate New York and you would like to chat with upstate New York about starting a evaluation, or if you have an evaluation, you want to make updates, you want to renew, that would be the email that you would reach out to. Otherwise, I'm going to stay on the line for just a couple minutes and see if you have any questions that I would be happy to answer. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining. Again, it was a pleasure. If you are in New York City right now, I hope that you're enjoying the snow and that you're staying warm and safe. And I will stay on again for a few more minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions being asked. So I just appreciate that you were all here to join me for the webinar. Thank you all and take care.